My name is Jeff Cronenweth. I'm the cinematographer of Being the Ricardos, and this is the Go Creative Show.
Hello and welcome to the Go Creative Show, a podcast for filmmakers. My name is Ben Consoli, and today we speak with Jeff Cronenweth, Director of Photography for Being the Ricardos. Jeff, welcome to the show. Welcome back to the show.
It's great to be back, Ben. Thank you.
Now, we've had you on, I think this might be your fourth or even fifth time on the show, so clearly we love having you, and for good reason. You do amazing work, and Being the Ricardos is just another in a long line of fantastic films. I just finished it last night. I really, really loved it, and I can't wait to talk to you about it. But before we get there, just want to mention our brand new sponsor. We're so excited about this, Filmmakers Academy. Master your craft at filmmakersacademy.com. You're going to hear much more about them later in the show. And of course, follow us on your favorite podcast app, as well as Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. All things Go Creative Show at gocreativeshow.com. So, what an iconic story to tell, Jeff. I mean, I Love Lucy. I think the biggest takeaway that I took from this movie is that I Love Lucy had 60 million viewers a week on average. Like, that is insane.
It's crazy, right? I mean, used to as written in Aaron's script. I mean, he talks about that the utility bills were less for that one half hour each night when people were watching it across the country. It's pretty amazing. And the thing that they don't tell you really is you got to understand, like, TV was still at its infancy stages. You know, it had only been introduced a few years earlier, really rudimentarily, and not everybody had one. You know, the country was half the size it is today or less, and maybe half the people had televisions or less, and you had one in one room of the house, and that was a big deal. So yeah, that's quite a lot of viewers, quite a lot of the market.
I don't think people realize what a success was when there was only a few channels. Like, being a star is so different now. It's almost like the threshold is so much lower because everything is spread out across so many different outlets. But back in that day, you only had a couple options.
Exactly. I mean, today, if I'm correct, I think, like, if you watch news programs, if they get 3 million people, that's quite a big deal. And we have 350 million or 320 million people in the country now. So, you know, put the numbers together. That's pretty unbelievable, incredible.
It certainly is. Now, you've worked with Aaron Sorkin before, as he was when you were doing Social Network.
Social Network.
Right. So this time, though, he's directing you and he's writing. Exactly. And I'd love to talk to you to kind of start with that relationship, because you know, it has to be difficult as a writer to also be directing. But as a cinematographer, when you're working with him, what is that chemistry like? What are those dynamics like when you have somebody responsible for so much on the directing side?
Well, okay, let me start at the beginning of that. Yeah, we did Social Network together. David Fincher directed it, of course, and Aaron wrote the script. Aaron was there quite a bit. There was quite a lot of collaboration between the two of them. I think because Aaron had such a tight kind of structure to what he had written, and the facts of it, and Fincher and the way that he writes, the quick paced, overlapping, interactive dialogue between cast members. Yep. David kept them around, and it was great to watch the two of them work together. And so I developed a relationship with Aaron on that, a good friendship and respect of each other's craft. And then for whatever reasons, Fincher felt very nostalgic at the end of that. And on the last shot of the movie, he left before all the goodbyes and had Aaron direct the last shot, which was an envelope being slid underneath the door. So I shot that, and Aaron directed it. And that was our first real, director DP relationship. So it was quite funny, almost 10 years, longer than 10 years later. When he called me it was a very funny interview. It was, I had read the script, loved it, knew I wanted to do it, just based on, the history of it, the a fan of the creativity that they brought to it, that Desi brought, that Lucy brought. Having watched the show as a kid and having grown up in a kind of an entertainment family, we kind of knew some people all interacting together, throughout the last 50 years, 100 years of the industry. So there was a lot of crossovers there. So it was very exciting for me to get that kind of opportunity. And so even before the call, I was hoping that the interview went well. It wasn't really an interview. It was like a lot of hello, what have you been up to? I've been watching your work. I'm a fan. Both of us saying the same things.
Yeah.
And then he simply asked. He goes, "Look, I just want this will be my third film. Obviously, he had done Molly's Game and Chicago 7, and I want you to bring what you bring to David's movies. I want my visual storytelling to keep evolving, and you'll make my Christmas if you say yes to do this film." And so Faden, who shot Chicago 7, got nominated for that film. It's a beautiful film, but half the movie, they were handcuffed a little bit, and half the movie takes place in a courtroom, and a courtroom is trying at best, when you're any situation where you're locked into one location for a very long time is challenging. And so this kind of opened the door as much as you can push somebody into new horizons, and so that was kind of the mantra that he gave me going into it. And then to answer the second part of it, that was really wonderful. And I keep saying this, and I don't know if it may sound confusing to some people, but to me it makes perfect sense. Aaron, when he structures a script and he writes a script, it's so complete. Like he has, at least in his mind, his story is complete. And so it's a tight little box. And in that box, it just frees up all of us to bring so much to contribute to it, because he's laid it out. There's no guessing. There's no things you're going to discover on the way. Structurally, creatively, of course, and talent-wise and performance-wise and location-wise and all those things will still come. But structurally, it's so tight that it just opens the door to what you can bring to it. And so while we were shooting, he handed over a lot of it. He hires really talented people to surround him. And then he, much like a conductor in an orchestra, watches each note and then goes, "You know what? I'm not sure about that. I can't tell you why. I can't really articulate what it is, but this is why I wrote it. This is where it's coming from. This is the backstory to the word that you rarely get when you're on set." So there's more knowledge to the reasoning why he came up with those solutions, or why that scene plays out the way it does. And so that brings nuances to it that sometimes get, in the chain of command, and a writer not necessarily being there on set or something, lost on the way. And so I found it to be really exciting, a lot of responsibility, but in a fun way, in a challenging way, and a provoking way to keep pushing something, to make it exciting.
I read an article with Sorkin talking, and I pulled the quote, but I forgot to know where the article was. But the quote was that he wanted a cinematographer that would stop him from the things he gets comfortable with while directing and being so close to the dialogue. I thought there was a really interesting quote. It might have been Hollywood Reporter, but I thought that was a really interesting quote and a little bit of an insight toward what a cinematographer is responsible for on set when working with a director-writer. Does that ring true to you at all, that idea of stopping him from doing things that make him comfortable?
There's a lot in that, because I've had opportunities over my career to work with a lot of writer-directors, and each of them, no two people are alike, and so people bring different things to it. But what I would say as a general rule of thumb is, if you wrote it, you want to watch the person say it. And if you're doing a stage play, it's a wonderful thing. You have a flat screen, pretty much, a stage and an audience sitting there, and they can sit in a chair and talk, and it's wonderful for 2 hours or an hour and a half. But as a film, as an audience member, or as someone creating content for an audience, it's your obligation to visualize those words and to add emotion and intent and light and drama and make them stronger and put the impact visually there in compositions and staging and blocking and all the things. And so sometimes, not in Aaron's case, because he's a very clever guy, as you know. You had the opportunity to talk to him. He's very funny as well. that you have to keep pushing those boundaries and not letting them get stuck with two people, talking at a table, which would suffice for the dialogue and all intents and purposes the story, but doesn't deliver you much impact that supports the very words that were written. Does that make sense?
It does. It does.
Yeah.
And I think it's well said. It makes a lot of sense. Let's talk about the look of Being the Ricardos. You had a bit of a challenge here. I mean, you're essentially doing a period piece, but it's a show within a show. You have the I Love Lucy parts on set. You also have you're really, for the first time in many, many decades, maybe forever, you're giving kind of a life to Lucy and Ricky as they are in real life, not just on the show.
Yeah.
So you have quite a bit going on. Talk to me about the look that you established for the film and how you got there.
Okay. I mean, to dissect it even more, there's almost 5 looks with 3 eras, and let me define those. There's an overall look of the movie, of their daily lives and their daily interactions after they were married, and through all the rehearsals and dress rehearsals and preparations for the upcoming episode of the show. Then there's when they met, which is about 10 to 12 years earlier. There's the what would appear to be the replication of the I Love Lucy show, but really is just Lucille Ball's manifestation of what the show will be, and her overcoming the comedic challenges that she does. And we use it, Aaron's very clever in not necessarily replicating the I Love Lucy show, but using it as an avenue to remind everybody of the iconic scenes that we all fell in love with, but show Lucy's wit and comedic genius on the way of problem solving to get those done, right? And so that's black and white. And then there's the interviews that were of, some 30, 40 years later of the writers all talking about historically what had happened and what they remembered in that one week, So those things were all fun to construction. And in general, what I pitched to Aaron at the very beginning was I thought that it would be great. Like the color saturation, the richness, and contrast are all something that were really important for us to share that era. But that I thought that there's a trend right now to shoot dark for dark. Like I'm not sure what the competition is, but whoever shoots the darkest movie wins something. But I'm all about contrast, and my movies aren't bright. At least I hope they're not. But I felt like it has to be motivated by the story. And so for these characters in this world, on the I Love Lucy set especially, I wanted to have a lot of depth. I wanted you to see and never get lost and not know the environment that they're in and you're in. And so there was lots of points of light. So I said, let's do something where there's a lot of contrast. It's good and rich and bold and all the things, because it's not a very light story. It's both. There's a lot of humor in it, but there's a lot of emotion in it. Yeah. And then separate the characters out by depth of field. So we shoot wide open, shoot large format glass, and so that you still know where they are and you're still aware, which is, for us, that set and the set that everyone's so familiar with, the living room of I Love Lucy, is another almost character and layer to every performance that happens there. And so it was always important to us not to lose that. And so separate them out and let them be lost in their worlds and their tension and the weight of the world that's crashing in amongst them with depth of field, and pull them out that way. And so that was kind of like the general-ized rule of everything.
I want to talk just a touch more about the depth of field, because the original I Love Lucy had none. Like it was flat. It was old school, sitcom. That's what it was. And even new school sitcom doesn't really have much depth of field. So, so you're really establishing kind of a new look, and by simply providing that depth of field, it brings you, it separates it enough from the show, allowing you to really understand who these characters are outside of the show. I fell in love with the look overall because I thought there was so much richness in it. Like, you really leaned into the warmth, the richness, the softness, and there was beauty in every single shot. There really was.
You're generous, but thank you. Exactly. That was the goal. I mean, when you're on the set itself, for those flashbacks where Lucy in her mind is recreating the show, the set's small. It's not that deep anyway. So the depth of field didn't play that well. And in those scenes, I chose to use the monochrome, the red monochrome, which is a camera dedicated to black and white photography anyways.
Oh, okay.
And so there's a couple of conversations we can have right in that.
Well, just to bring people up to speed, just to explain for those that may not have seen it, there are these periods in the film where Lucy kind of thinks about how to approach a scene. They're trying to figure out the best way to solve a problem. And you're sort of seeing what appears to be like, a recreation of the actual show, a scene from the show, but it's really like internally in her mind. So you have a little bit of room there to play with. It's not a full-on recreation of the scene, but it is in black and white.
It is in black and white, and it is our tip of the hat to those shows, and an opportunity, a great way, a mechanical way of getting to the show without actually having to do it. It's never seen on a TV. It's never seen anywhere. It's only manifested in Lucille Ball's head, and so you get away from the trap of having to be exact replications of something that people were attached to. But we even within that, and there's a few segues that we can have here. The black and white. So the black and white in the I Love Lucy show was shot by a cinematographer named Carl Freund, and he was really a feature guy. He won an Oscar in 1937 for a film called The Good Earth. He invented a lot of the processes. He was a German expressionist that came over and started working in Hollywood and became very successful and was known for his technical ingenuity. In fact, he invented the incident meter, which is an indirect light meter to read light and expose for film. And Desi Arnaz reached, Desi was quite the businessman and clever guy, and asked Carl to come and try to solve a couple problems, because at the time, most of the shows were done in New York. And unless you lived in the New York area in Manhattan, you didn't get that was where you got the live broadcast and a live TV, and the quality was at the max that you could get in 1952. Everybody else across the country, or outside of whatever the broadcast range was of that station, got a kinescope, which was where they took a television and aimed a camera at the television and filmed the television broadcast of what was being done live by whoever sitcom was being photographed. And then that was made into 1,000 prints and sent to every broadcast station across the country, and you watched it however many days later, broadcast back off this film, and it just kept getting worse and worse and worse quality-wise.
So they would record to tape or to film.
There was no tape.
Yeah, exactly. But they would record to, it would get stripped down into basically a television screen, and then would you call it a kinescope? Is that what you called it?
Mm-hmm.
The kinescope would be filming the screen.
Correct.
And then that was the hard copy that got sent to the networks.
Correct.
Oh, okay. That's wild.
So in that, a couple things. Desi and Lucy didn't want to live in New York. They wanted to live in California. And they didn't want the quality of they didn't want anybody seeing it less at a degraded level. They wanted everybody to watch it in the highest possibility, right? And the best quality that they could. So they decided to film the show. And in doing so, they got pushback from the sponsors and from CBS, and they offered to pay for it themselves because they wanted the quality. However, when they paid for it themselves, they owned it afterwards, and nobody owned their shows afterwards because most live shows evaporated into the ether, not Ethernet, ether. And so, hence the birth of syndication. Because Desi owned them afterwards, and then they replayed them later, where they hadn't no library yet because they hadn't developed tape to record the live shows yet. So in doing this, they got Carl to do it. And one of the things that was one of the mandates for him is one, it's a 3-camera show. They got to shoot it. More or less, they shot it live. I think they did it within. I think they did a half-hour show under an hour, but they moved the cameras a few positions. There's costume changes, all the things that happen. But for all intents and purposes, it was a live show. And they wanted to do it with an audience because they felt the performers had better reactions when there was a live audience watching them, and so he had to light this from a position where you wouldn't block the audience, where you could stage the cameras, where it looked beautiful. And also, all along the process, they built up contrast, and the contrast ratios that TV's broadcast at the time were very minimal. And so if you had been on the set while they were doing the show, it would have looked almost even to you. It would have been a 2-to-1 contrast ratio, including like aging down newspapers and nothing white, and all the clothes tea stained, so that everything is all within the same tonalities. Because as he shot it, and then as it got broadcast, and then by the time it got to 1952 television sets, it gained contrast on the way. And so that's the things that this brilliant guy was dealing with, and that's why the show looks like it did. Now, when you do a period piece, you got to look at the era, and you want to extract all the things that are close to your heart, that are the best parts of it. But they did the best they could with what they had in 52. People that go see this is an audience that grew up watching Game of Thrones and Dragons in the Sky. And are they going to appreciate the fact that there's 9 shadows on the wall and that it's flat lit because it's so authentic? Or am I missing the boat by not giving them something more to bite onto, but still being respectful of what it was that the show looked like? And I chose the latter. I added more contrast. I used a much better camera. I had higher highlights. But it's all still within that world. And that's the kind of thing that you always have to decide when you're doing a period piece. Where do I want to get that from? And so what you do is you go back and you watch the shows. You watch I Love Lucy. You watch shows of that era, movies of that era. And then more importantly to me, I think you look at your contemporaries, what they've done in that period, and what you liked about those projects and what you didn't like about those projects. And for me, it was things like LA Confidential, that Dante photographed, or Carol that Ed Lockman photographed, or Peggy Sue Got Married that my father photographed, and see oh, I like that, or no, that didn't work for me. And then, mine's a little bit different because a good portion of the film takes place on that stage. And so I was able to go back and use some of the same light sources that they used.
Well, that was something I wanted to discuss with you, and we might as well do it now since we're talking about it, is you had an opportunity to film a lot of this film, actually on what appears to be the set of I Love Lucy. So you have access to, because you simply had to, with your props department, you had to be using, or at least be seeing, practical lights of the time. So I'm curious, in creating the set and actually filming the set, are you just using old school tungstens, as if they were there?
Yes and no. The art departments who usually are on board before us doing a lot of research were had a plethora of photographs from the set itself, from the I Love Lucy set. Plus, I mentioned red. I used red cameras on this movie. Both the Red Ranger, which is the 8K camera that we did most of the principal photography with, and then the Red Monochrome, which is a camera dedicated to black and white, which is like what David and Eric Messerschmidt used on Mank. Yeah. Red Studios Red Studios is now what used to be Renmar, which was before that was Desi Lou, and so they have a lot of the old stuff there. But
no way.
But I didn't need to go there because the art department had taken care of a lot of it. We looked at the photographs. I decided what I wanted to use. I built some stuff because some stuff doesn't exist anymore. They have these funny soft boxes, which is not really the style in the era. But it was really like these rectangular soft boxes, which was way before its time, I thought, which were wonderful for me. And then big-eyed 10Ks and sky pans, and they had footlights on the dollies, which is a little bit odd to me. But and then they had eye lights on the cameras themselves, which makes sense. But I think that they, dealing with very slow ISO film at the era, and trying to serve 3 cameras in 3 different, not complete directions, but certainly cross covering each other, you kind of had to light everything. And so they did. And so we were able to use a lot of that and rebuilt. We had the same catwalks that they had, or the green beds, they call them, that they used. They were the same ones that they had on the I Love Lucy set. They've been around long. And so there was a lot of historical, like, prizes that came along like that, where we discovered these things. But essentially, it was an era picture. Tungsten light was so beautiful, and I utilized that most of the time. There's certain situations where space or intensity, we had to go with LEDs and certain things. But between HMIs and tungsten light, it's more or less like how we lit it. I just didn't use 11 shadows. I had 10 fake lights not doing anything, and one that actually was a key or something, because I think, it was funny to consider that idea, but I think it would get lost and it just wouldn't look good to a modern audience,
I think your instincts were clearly right, but also it's like this is so far back that I think a lot of the people watching this may not have even seen a single episode of I Love Lucy. Like, I think you're dealing with something that is just it's too far back away where I don't think the reference point is going to be there for most of your audience.
Yeah.
As well as as if you did something in like the 80s or 90s.
I agree with you, but you'd be surprised. My girlfriend was born in Vietnam and came here 20 years ago, and she knows every episode. And my daughter's 24 and worked on the movie with us, and unbeknownst to me, she's seen all of them. So
wow.
It's a crazy thing.
Clearly I'm wrong then. I mean, I know the iconic ones, but
I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just like, people watch it.
You can say I'm wrong. It's fine.
people watch it, and the thing is, you gotta be careful when you're doing period pieces. This is for everybody, not just this movie, that you're not making a parody of the era, unless that's the point, which rarely that is, And so those are kind of the things that you got to check yourself all the time. Then the other parts of it, the interviews were kind of not modern. They're still 30 years ago in the 90s. But you had to have a little bit of a contemporary look to the other stuff from that. And then the thing that was really fun was in the 40s. I loved the 40s were, there was a lot going on. There was a war and there was other things happening, but they were finding like star power, if you will. They would light these actresses very boldly and dramatically with slashes and isolated keys where they would stand and glow, but just their eyes and stuff. And it's a phrase I made up, I think, but I like fashion noir. It was very bold. And my grandfather was a still photographer for the studios in Columbia for the longest. And
you come from a lineage, Jeff. My God.
Yeah, I know, right? And he won an Oscar. They used to have an Oscar category for still photographers because they couldn't shoot parallel like they do now. They shoot next to us and shoot whatever we're shooting. In those days with the big flashes and all that, they had to direct the actors, design the sets, and they were like the sole source of publicity for a movie. So it was much bigger role. And so those guys, my grandfather's era and his peers like Harrell, if you know Harrell's work, very bold. He was probably of that era. He was the most famous, successful still photographer, but very bold. And so
I'll put it in the show notes. Hurrell?
Hurrel. I'm not sure, actually.
We'll find it. Oh, there it is. Oh, yeah. George Harrell.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, we'll put it in. Oh, wow. Yes. This is like what you think about when you think about the 40s,
right?
Yeah.
And so when Lucy, when they were first meeting, they meet on a set of a movie they're doing together called Too Many Girls, and she's a beat up hooker, and she walks in on set, and then comes back later, and they go on their first date, and those kind of flashbacks. I lit it. I incorporated some of the things that they did, so it was like a fun opportunity. I couldn't use black and white because we were already doing that for the show to show the time jump. So rather than, off color or something too diffused or any of the techniques that have been used over the years, I just changed the style of light quite a bit. And of course they're younger in those scenes and stuff, but that was really fun actually to do.
Is that your favorite stuff, the 40s flashbacks?
It's okay. It was probably the most fun to do, but I think some of the prettier stuff is some of Lucy's close-ups are just amazing with Nicole.
Oh yeah,
and the right light, and when she's waiting nervously to find out if the audience is going to accept her at the end of the movie, and she's peering through the kitchen window, kind of hiding backstage. That's one of my favorite shots, and what I find is really, and this is a tribute to Aaron's ability and the cast who suck us in so well, is every time I've seen it, and I've seen it, doing the DI for doing the color correct for 16 days, and then all the screenings and stuff. I've seen it a lot of times, and it's still like emotionally when the 5 of them go outside, or 4 of them go outside to say goodbye. So they don't know if the show's going to get canceled, and they're all kind of like patting each other on the back and kind of mending any wounds that had evolved through the movie. It just gets you every time. And so,
yep, there really isn't a throwaway shot in this film. There's something about, I think, the combination of Aaron's writing and your cinematography that really respects the audience, and you also respect the the project and the work that you're doing, and of course the legacy of I Love Lucy and all that, but you really are respecting the audience with this film in a way where the writing is not dumbed down, the cinematography is not dumbed down, nothing is a throwaway. Like you're appreciating every shot as you watch this. There's beauty in the whole thing. I mentioned it earlier, and honestly, I'm not just kissing ass here. There's so many points in this movie where a shot hits you and you're like, God damn, that looks good. Right. Particularly in, there was a lot of scenes at their house that I just fell in love with. Just everything's landing perfectly. It's warm. Everything's gorgeous. But it's not just beauty cinematography for beauty's sake. If that makes any sense. It never feels like you're trying to do anything. It just always feels like they just landed perfectly where they need to. But it never felt forced. And that was something that really stuck out to me when I was watching it. That's
something that, my father preached to me from early ages, that it's about story and supporting the story and not showboating and not getting in the way of the story, because it's really easy to shoot a bunch of backlight and silhouettes, and people go crazy for that, and people running along mountaintops at sunset. It's beautiful, no doubt about it, but that's easy to do, and it doesn't necessarily support the story. But if you can make pretty pictures and keep the narrative contained and structured in a way that it supports everything and not drawing attention to itself, then you've done a really good job. But, you said something earlier about no bad shots, and the integrity of it, a smart, or no
throwaways.
Respecting the audience, you said. And yes. I'll tell you something about, every movie's different, but because of it was I Love Lucy, and because, everybody loved the script, believed in the script, and because the cast was so fun to watch every day, there's not a person on the crew that wasn't engaged 100%. It was really interesting. We're doing it during COVID, so everyone had masks and all the testing and all the extra precautions that you have to go through to stay shooting. But even fourth, fifth grips, electrics, it didn't matter. They were all excited and watching and driven, and everybody would talk at lunch. And there was no lunch, but afterwards, and you would hear the conversations, and it was there was just a good vibe about it. And I think it starts with Lucy and Desi and the script and the love of the show, and then falls to, Aaron's leadership and the work we were all doing. Everybody was really invested, and it shows, I think. It really does.
I want to take a moment and talk about Filmmakers Academy. Shane, there's nobody better to talk about this than you. This is your baby. This is your academy. Of course, you and your wife and a whole bunch of additional mentors and trainers. But can you just give us an overview of what Filmmakers Academy is and how it's different?
Yeah, Filmmakers Academy is this online, powerful resource that's everything filmmaking. Lydia had this idea very early on in 2009 when I was kind of kind of, spearheading the whole DSLR revolution. And she's like, Shane, you need to share this knowledge. You need to, spread it out to the world so we can kind of educate filmmakers about all this trailblazing that you've been doing with this small little camera. And I was like, okay. She's like, I'm going to brand you. We're going to become Hurlbut Visuals, and we're going to launch this blog, and it's going to just unite the masses. And sure enough, it did. And what we found was all these people had these incredible creative ideas, but they didn't necessarily know how to do it, how to go about making movies and commercials and music videos. So we're like, why don't we fill that gap? So now we're starting to bring a whole collection of filmmakers together. Derek Edwards, Derek Johnson, Chris Hare, Jordan Brady, Dave Cole. Now that's going to be all available on the Filmmakers Academy.
It's available right now at filmmakersacademy.com. So check it out for yourself, guys. I know you're going to love these things. filmmakersacademy.com.
We've got a question from Instagram here, and you may have answered this a little bit earlier, but Connor Harrington wants to know, was there pressure to nail the shots from the original I Love Lucy show, or just capturing the essence of it?
No, I think, any interviews that you've heard Aaron or the cast talk about, the idea was that we were going to do an impression of it, but not an impersonation of it, of anything, of them, of the I Love Lucy show. However, the integrity of the actors, they rehearsed it crazy, and they want, that's where they were going to be most closely judged. That's what everybody held closest to your heart. That's why there was the choice of it not actually being the broadcast itself, but a manifestation of the broadcast, so that there was some leeway to justify, not being identical matches. But that said, for example, probably the most iconic scene is the grape stomping scene. We started to shoot it. I had 3 cameras set up, all coming from the same direction, so the light was fine. It was pretty broad, and we were worried like she would get covered in stain the clothes, and there wouldn't be a chance to do too many takes and all those things. So, and Nicole, we start rolling. Nicole does it, climbs in. Mannerisms, looks are identical to the show, like scary identical to the real show. And about 30 seconds into it, she starts to move around, and Aaron's like, "Cut! I got it," because he knew in his mind he was only going to use 10 to 15 seconds of it at all, and we did 30 seconds of it. She's like, "Wait a second, hang on. I rehearsed this for 4 months. There's another 4 minutes of it." And he's like, "Oh, keep rolling. And she kept going, and she did the whole thing, everything, the speed of she starts running, and then she starts doing like a farmer's dance, and she starts high stepping and going around and around and around. And, it's just a credit to how much they studied the characters that they were playing and how much they rehearsed it. And, Javier and Nicole both, is amazing. So there was a lot of detail to those scenes. We were really worried about that's what we'd be judged on the most. But I think that they got it really, really well. And the sets were perfect, identical, and the wardrobe was identical, and my light was in the world, not identical, but we talked about that already.
Yeah. Her mannerisms, and she really, in those black and white scenes, she looks like her regardless and throughout the whole film. But in those scenes when her hair is done up the certain way and she's got the wardrobe on, and you're like, God damn, she really looks like Lucille Ball. I was reading this morning too that she was even apprehensive about the role to begin with because of how iconic it was. And it was one of those things where it's like, I don't even know if I can do it type of a thing. Well,
it's surprisingly close to people's hearts. And you elicit a lot of reactions from people, because they want to see exactly, they cherish it and they want to hold it and they want it to be exactly like it was. The problem before the movie was ever released was that this movie's not about Lucille, Ricardo, and Desi Ricky Ricardo. This is about Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz, and nobody knows them because those characters were created for a TV show. Yeah. Now you're seeing real people, and people aren't letting go of what they're familiar with, so they're judging them based on the two characters that are not who these people were. Those were the manifestations and the creative like choices they made to personify those two, Lucy Ricardo and Desi, Ricky Ricardo. And so
I just want to talk briefly about the gear package. I know you mentioned you shot on 2 different red cameras. Can you just dive a little bit more into those choices? How you ended up with those choices. I know you're a red guy regardless, but still, lens choices, filtrations, all that kind of stuff. Our audience would love to know. I'd love to know.
Sure. I went with the Red Rangers, which was at the time the newest 8K camera that they had. I fell in love with that camera on Social Network. I love the way it interpolates color. I love the color science that they bring to it, and the speed and more resolution. Different people go about it different ways, and you can't really make a mistake nowadays. The cameras are so good from all the manufacturers. Yeah. But it's just something I know really well, and so I needed the 8K because I wanted the larger chip to have less depth of field, which we talked about. Yeah. And then the monochrome is the only one that does that. That's the only dedicated black and white camera available in that large format like that. And so that was a given. We did some tests first, about just reducing the color on the Ranger and going that way, but it's not nearly as rich as a camera completely dedicated to light and dark, And then I am told I'm the first to do this, to kind of cross-pollinate. I used the Arri DNA glass, the 70 mil DNA glass that was used on the Joker and on some of the Star Wars movies and whatnot. And it's a set of lenses that they specifically made to address everybody going back to getting vintage glass or trying to find the old anamorphic Arri Panavision glass and all the things that had built-in imperfections or aberrations that would add a little magic to images that are getting so pristine now, right? You want to kind of you want all that technology and you want it to be able to step on it later, but you want to kind of take down some of the sharpness and some of the oversaturation and some of the problems that you had, that stuff's all great for an NFL football game, but it's not so good for telling an emotional story about somebody, I think the thing about film that we all love so much is it was something like we feel like we could almost touch it. There was a tactile kind of structure to grain when you sat in that seat, and it felt the connection was closer. So we're all striving to get back to that all the time. And so these DNA lenses, it was all they were rehoused and reconstructed of old glass, and no two lenses are the same, which is funny, and no set's the same. So they all have a little bit of personality. You kind of have to manage that as you're going through it. But it seemed like a great idea to shoot that era with something of that world, but and then brought all the kind of nuances that we loved in the lenses of the era without actually using old glass, because the older I did that on Hitchcock, and there's all kinds of coating issues, like you get hot windows or use windows as a main source. You can get kind of veiling, or you can get some highlights that you don't want, and so I just struggled with that. I didn't want to do that again. So this seemed like a perfect combination of both. And then a friend of mine, Steve Meisler, shot Queen's Gambit, and I called him right after I saw it and told him, what a masterful job he did on that show, and asked him right away, what diffusion did you use? And he used this diffusion called Black Satin. And so I tested that amongst a few. I was always a fan of something called Hollywood Black Magic. Yeah. And so I just did some tests, and it seemed for this film, the Black Satins were something that I thought was the best representation of what I wanted to do. And so that was it. That was the Arri DNA glass, the Red Ranger camera, the Red Ranger monochrome, and Black Satins.
How did that black satin compare to the Hollywood black magic? Because this conversation comes up quite a bit because the Hollywood black magic has been for a long time the go-to, and in some ways still is. Yeah. But I've been hearing more and more about the black satin.
I liked its softness, what it did to people's faces without adding more color or contrast. You know, that's the problem. Anytime you put anything in front of the lens, you're kind of adding an element, an optical element, and you get different things, you know, and that's why, you know, depending on what it is you're seeking, different diffusion does different things, and it changes contrast, it changes color, it changes the perceived resolution or how sharp someone's face is and the structure of their face. And so for what I wanted to do, which was keep colors but have this slightly muted look to them, it worked out. It was a good combination for me.
Yeah. I want to talk about camera motion in being the Ricardos. Because I know that was a big, at least based on what I read this morning, it seems as though that was a big discussion between you and Aaron, and you wanted to really think about the best way to approach movement in the film. So let's talk about that. How did you approach it?
It goes back to him wanting, you know, two things. One, supporting the script and the story, but creating, you know, not moving the camera for the sake of moving, because then you're lacking content, but creating scenes where actors move so that you have to follow them, so that you create tension or drama if it's one of those scenes, or intimacy if it's that. And because there's so much dialogue that goes on in Aaron's scripts. I'll tell you just a little side note. We started the movie, and I think there was 140 pages in it, and it wanted to fit in 2 hours, roughly 2 hours 5 minutes. And throughout the prep and of the movie, more pages kept coming until we were like 189 pages.
Wow!
But the producer was like, "Oh no, it's still 2 hours and 5 minutes." You're like, how does that happen? How do we add 40, 50 more pages? And it's the same. And then, of course, you know, people talking over top of each other, rapid fire. Each scene's full of a lot of words. And so it does. It's just that energy and that kind of chess game that the verbal chess game that he plays with each character. And so knowing that, you want to create situations where people don't get lost, where you can actually, you know, the camera's not flying around and you're missing the weight of the words or what the meaning of the words are, but you want to keep it interesting, and you want to block out scenes where people are not just stuck in chairs and sitting, which is something that we talked about a lot beforehand, making sure that the cast was alive and it wasn't, you know, we weren't confined or didn't feel claustrophobic at all. And so we would just block each sequence and get the cast in and try to figure out where places were comfortable, or where they, you know, one scene that I'm particularly fond of, the way it blocked out, was there's a scene where Madeline, one of the writers, Nicole wants a private conversation with her, and they come out of the writer's room office and they go down to a tiny little corridor, right? And so when we were scouting, we were trying to figure out a place. Like, we knew where the office was going to be, and we knew where Jess's office was going to be. In this room, where would they stop? And Aaron wanted it to be a little, like, they could get their privacy for a minute, because it was an intimate conversation. So we looked at all the different places, and that corridor seemed like the perfect place. But that corridor was just a flat wall and a fire escape side door. There was no light, no window. And I asked the art department if they could put a window in. So that's like one of the places where I used LEDs, because there was only a space this big between that and a fake window. And so we built the window. It looked beautiful. That was the source of light. And then I asked Nicole and Madeline to play, to see if they could juxtapose, if there was any time in that move when they're walking around where it would be kind of Aaliyah. I used her character name, Aaliyah and Nicole. where they felt like they'd want to like kind of size each other up and switch positions, and they loved the idea. And so they get in there, and it's very confined. It was kind of hard to get coverage, but we got 2 cameras in, and they would just kind of do this dance, and they came in and out of light and half light and silhouette and half light and back. And it's such a great scene, the words that they're saying to each other and whatnot. And so it just worked out. And that was them and us all blocking it together, which could have been very kind of confining, rudimentary 2-shot for the whole time, turned into this little dance that really paid off for us.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that scene, because what I was getting at with my line of questioning as far as how are you approaching camera movement, that scene to me really cemented in the idea that the movement was really more in the blocking than anything else.
Yeah.
And these dialogue scenes that could otherwise just kind of be bland, if they could be shot in a bland way because people are just talking. There was this constant feeling that there was movement and momentum, but it wasn't even coming from the camera, which I thought was such a unique way to approach it. And that scene in particular, I think, does a really good job of doing it because of that constantly switching directions. Your 2 characters are changing place all the time. And what I guess now that we've talked about that, my follow-up question to that is, when you go into scenes that is so dialogue heavy, wall-to-wall dialogue, does it change the way you shoot? Because you don't really have the opportunity to have like a big opening shot, or like somebody enters the frame and you've got 10 seconds to show this beautiful location. You don't have that. You have wall-to-wall dialogue. How does that change the way you approach a shot, or a scene rather?
I still think it does and it doesn't. It depends on specific scenes, but more times than not, we would do a master of some sort, whether it's cowboys hips and up or something master, but we still tried to do a master, and then blocked it where we'd be forced to make cuts or forced to move the camera, one or the other. And on the rare occasion, and this happened on Social Network as well, especially the opening sequence between Jesse and Rooney when they're breaking up at the restaurant in Social Network. That dialogue happens so fast and so over top of each other that it becomes an editorial nightmare. And it's the few times where you're compelled to shoot 2 cameras opposing each other, 2 different directions. It's not ideal to light to, but if you block it out the right way and you have a common source from behind them and you stay on this side of the line, which you have to do basically, you can make it work. And that gives the editor and the director choices to take individual takes that will never be the same again and have things that match. And so that happens occasionally. And if you know it's going to be one of those scenes, you want to find a point where you can get them in that position where that coverage will actually help you out. Other than that, like, we always just try to take each sequence and go, how can I add something to this? Or how can we get in or out of it that allows us, following somebody in, taking someone out, something wide to establish it, although there's not that many establishing shots. But, say like, for example, the table reads, we had an opportunity to introduce the entire set and come up from behind the bleachers and show off. And those kind of things are nice. Or the reverse, when Desi and Lucy first make their entrance onto that set, big stage, elephant doors fly open, the sun comes blasting in, they make this grand entrance. But it supported the story, it wasn't just showing off. It was telling the lay of the land. It was letting the audience see, like, what is this stage, where the different doors are. It's going to play later in other sequences, so you got to know the geography of this place. And so those all things kind of served us really well.
Yeah. And I absolutely loved the final shot in the film too. Just that pull up through the set, through like the lighting grid and everything. It's really, really a great shot. And I'm curious where that came from. Is that something that was written in the script? Is there something that came from you, or?
No, that was Aaron's idea. He wanted to let her be little in this world that she created. And it's not working out for her. And this is the only place that she's going to find this perfect little world, and how small she feels in it at that moment. And so, the pullout, we didn't know exactly what we talked about doing a cable cam of some sort so that we pulled across all the bleachers and all that, but that involved all of them and wasn't really the isolation that he was looking for. That the way that it felt like you wanted to leave the two of them, and especially her, alone. And so we did some rehearsals and took some stills and put them together in previs, and just thought that we would pull up through the perms, and then when we ran out, just keep adding until we dissolved into the noise of a television screen.
Yeah.
And then as it slowly fades out to black and white to the TV show, and then goes to the noise on the television screen. And so we used a decelerator rig, like people when they're jumping out of buildings and whatnot, it's a cable and it counters itself, and made some cable rig from the floor up, and then slid all the way up and got as high as we could go, and the rest was CG.
It's such a cool shot. So, Jeff, I want to talk about the opening scene of Being the Ricardos, because you handled it in a really unique way where the characters aren't seen for a couple minutes into the film. You actually almost see them from the waist down. Talk to me about that scene and that strategy and how you came to film it in that way.
The way it's written was there was 4 shots. And it starts off over the couch, and you see Lucy's legs, and then you hear them arguing, and then the shot descriptions were very vague, but there was 4 of them, and he was holding off to kind of introduce them until Walter Winchell says that Lucy was a communist, and America's favorite sweetheart or favorite redhead is a communist or something. And then we introduced them because we want, all along Aaron wanted it to be a slow build and let the audience slightly get adjusted to it before we launch into Nicole and Javier. And I kept going like, oh my gosh, there's like 6 pages of dialogue and we have 4 shots and we don't see them. And I kept like revisiting and going, creating like 10 different shots, 15 shots, like through the wine glass and obscuring them, and reflections off the table and this and that. And I had the art department in a small corner of the stage plot out that living room with tape and bring the couch in and bring the radio in, and went with a finder and tried to block it out. And I kept fighting the way it was written. And it dawned on me when I was doing the blocking, like, this is perfect. He's figured it out already. Like, why am I trying to wreck what is already there? And what I ended up doing was, he's like, I want 4 shots. You figure it out. We're not going to get them until this point. And I just thought, as an audience, you'd be like, it's too much time, screen time. And so instead, like, I took this old radio and I added a mirror to one of the doors so that you could look at the radio and see them reflected back in it. There was a magazine drop, and you have to see that it's Desi with another girl who we find out later is the sponsor's daughter. But you see their bodies. And I came up with it became crystal clear that the way it was originally conceived was the most dramatic way to present it, and don't fight it and let it have that screen time and let it play out and let it be uncomfortable until that moment. And so we just came up with 3 shots that, designed, and then through reflections and then over them, and the magazine falling in the mirror and all those things. And
I love the way that the film opens because you're sort of drawn in a little bit, and it's really not that much time. I mean, I know that it probably feels like that when you're looking at the script, but watching it, you must now feel that there's an appropriate amount of time to sort of draw you in. Plus, it makes you're like, it builds up this anticipation to be like, what are they going to look like? Like, how realistic are they going to look like, the actual characters?
It's so clever because right away he makes he uses the most famous line that we also close on is, Lucy, I'm home.
Yeah.
And everybody's like, oh, okay, now I know who it is. And, just the tension to the reveal was very, very clever, so well conceived. And that's what I said at the very beginning. It's like, it's structured so tight that you just have to, bring your creative input to that and make it better. And that was really fun.
What I like about it, and maybe it's just getting a little bit too in the weeds, and maybe I'm finding something that isn't there, but there's a B storyline. Well, it's actually kind of an A storyline throughout the whole film about Lucy trying to deal with this situation where Ricky comes home, puts his hands over her eyes, and she's supposed to like act as though she doesn't know who he is. And it's this back and forth between they don't want to make their audience feel stupid by pretending that they don't know something like that. And it's this constant like, would she know that it's actually him? And I found that intro scene was sort of reminiscent of that whole conflict because you're discovering who these people are through their voice and their body motion, and you do kind of know who they are. And there was something about this idea of, does the audience believe that this is happening? Does this person actually know who I am? There's a lot of those questions in the opening scene, and I thought it tied in perfectly with that challenge that she was trying to overcome. Maybe I'm overlooking it or overthinking it.
No, you're not. It's a perfect bookend to it. And it supports her argument, because right at the beginning when he says that and we don't even know whose couch it is or who's laying on the couch, you know right away who they are. Right away. And that's what she was saying. Like in the 37 other times that he's said it to great laugh, why wouldn't we do that? And that's funny. And it's funny how he has the older version of the writers not remembering what the line was. It's like, how could you not remember that line of all lines, right?
Yeah.
It's the only line that everybody remembers. So, yeah.
It really is. Well, the film is awesome. You guys should definitely check it out. It's on Amazon Prime. So, you guys could see it right at this very moment. It's called Being the Ricardos. It looks amazing. The story's great. I really loved it. And Jeff, your work was just awesome on it. So thank you so much for coming back.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
What's next for you? What are you working on?
I shoot commercials. I direct commercials in between long form projects. And my brother and I just finished a couple of things that are coming up. And then I got a couple of really exciting things right next week and the week after. And then I don't know yet. We'll see.
Oh, that's awesome.
Waiting for Aaron to write his next script.
Exactly. Well, we'll wait for you to do it, and then you can come back on the show and talk about it.
I will. Absolutely. Love to.
Thank you so much, Jeff Cronenweth. The film is called Being the Ricardos. Check it out right now.
Cheers.
All right, great. All right, I want to thank Jeff Cronenweth for coming back on the show. He was the director of photography for Being the Ricardos, and he's such a great guest, and we love having him here. So thank you so much, Jeff, for being on. Of course, we also want to thank all of you guys for listening to the show and asking your questions and being involved. We really love it, so please let us know what you think of this show. I want to thank Connor Crosby, our producer. You can find him at ignitionvisuals.com. And of course, Dave Siegel from Siegel Sound. He mixes and masters and makes the show sound so good. And our brand new sponsor, Filmmakers Academy. I am so excited to start our relationship with those guys. It's such a great place to go to master your craft. That's their tagline, that's their slogan, but it really is true. Master your craft at filmmakersacademy.com. And you'll be hearing a lot from Shane and the other educators on the website in future episodes. So lots of cool stuff on the way. We're very happy to be working with Filmmakers Academy. Of course, we want to encourage you all to follow us on your favorite podcast app, as well as Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, where we put the video of each episode. All things Go Creative Show at gocreativeshow.com. And of course, follow me on Instagram at Ben Consoli. You can see what I'm doing behind the scenes of Go Creative Show, and then also my production company, BC Media Productions. I want to thank you all for joining us today, and we will see you next week on another episode of the Go Creative Show, a podcast for filmmakers.